Dan Dare here. At the age of 60, I'm making my first ever YouTube video. Here I am, playing Steel Divisions 2 against a hard-level AI. I set the battle to be tactical, that is, the deployment points are set to the lowest possible value, so unit density and action is low. I'm using this as a training exercise to practice my micro without getting overwhelmed. I have the 3rd Canadian Infantry, and I'm up against the Hungarian 1st Cavalry, or Eschlovas. I've used auto-deploy here, which is not great. It just plonked all these guys in the middle. In future videos I'll probably use a manual deploy. As you can see, I've got a couple of tanks and 2 recon vehicles, so I send my Humber up the hill there to the woods to get eyes on that big open field. Send some tanks off to the left, a 2nd Humber up to the right a little bit. Here's the 1st Humber going up the hill up close. I quite like the markings on this. So if you have a look around to the right, see it's got a nice big spare tyre there. Quite a nice little armoured vehicle, not heavily armoured though. Little Canadian marking on the side, and in the distance there is the 2nd Humber going to get eyes on the far right of the battlefield. As you can see, the front line is pushing in my direction fairly aggressively on the left, so I'm bringing in a few units to put in that small town in the middle there, and looking around to see where I think the big push is coming. Obviously there seems to be some units on the left. I have these infantry pieces coming in, but it sort of looks a bit dangerous to go along that road, so I've redirected them to that woodland more in the middle. Unbeknownst to me, on the left we have all these troops coming in at reasonable clip along the road, I should say. Interestingly though, the AI, I think, unloads them a bit prematurely, which gives me a bit of an advantage for coming up to meet them. Here they are coming down the road, and there they are unloading in the middle of a big empty field instead of going ahead to the objectives that they're trying to capture. Back in the centre, this is where I discover that the Hungarian light armour is heavily outclassed by my Sherman tanks. And that was a really quick shot, efficient cleanup, I think. And back over here on the left, the enemy's advancing slowly across the field, and I have some reinforcements coming up the road to try and push back whatever's there. Of course, I haven't seen those units yet, and they haven't seen me. At this point in the replay, it's fairly obvious I was in danger of getting spotted by that tank. However, I got lucky. My infantry dive across at the same time as the tank is preoccupied with something to the right, and make it into the cover of the trees. After knocking a few trees down stealthily, it's then followed by my rifle's leader, who also is not seen by the tank and unloads safely. Nothing much happening on the right, but you can see there's some forces coming into the central town, which is currently defended by 2 Sherman tanks and not much else. A little bit of a firefight in the foreground at that little salient that the enemy's pushed into my territory. I didn't know what forces were in there, but it wasn't really very much. So looking into the town, seems like time to start moving my guys up to cover this road. I become aware that the tanks are moving in because my Humber saw them. So here we go for a setup. See if we can double team the enemy. I'm still amazed at how quickly the Shermans can clean up that light armour. And now the enemy's got some infantry in the buildings, which is a bit of a harder problem. But the tanks are going to stop them from advancing too easily in the open, so they decide to go around instead via the church and off to the left. So we can't leave the Sherman up there by itself looking after the town, so we send in some reinforcements here, have some infantry and a Wolverine tank destroyer. Up they come up the road, and they'll be engaging in the battle momentarily. This is the first time in this battle that I identify a situation where my mind was focused elsewhere, and it would have been better if I could have moved one of my fast units up against the infantry that become pinned so that I could force them to surrender, saving myself some time and a great deal of ammunition. But I wasn't looking, and it wasn't until later when it became less easy to do so. And these poor infantry here are getting blasted by incoming shells. Again, my mind's elsewhere, not really focused in here, but I do eventually notice what's going on in the town, and I get my infantry to retreat, those that have survived, and start heading my tanks forward for a bit of a clean-up on the left there. And they're really good at it. Just watch them just charge in and take out those tanks. And here's that Humber I sent over onto the far right. It's got a nice little quiet position up on a hill, looking out over basically an empty landscape, although I can hear the combat going on in the town behind it. There's not really any opposition out here, and I wasn't aware of how empty that all was. Otherwise I would have said something in there. I could really have used some extra recon out here, so I'd sent the command unit forward, and it spots this enemy tank, which it's not really equipped to deal with. So it pulls back, and I bring in a Wolverine, which I've sent towards that building. Here's the tank sitting out here, basically commanding the open terrain in front of those woods, waiting for something to poke its head out. What I didn't know at the time was that the other tank is over there. You can see it. It's just quietly hanging out in these trees. There he is. and for some reason pointing away from my end of the map, which is good. And it means he doesn't see my Wolverine coming up here. At least, not yet. Again, my focus is elsewhere on the battle at this point, so the Wolverine reaches the destination I set for it and sits there, waiting and waiting for a little bit, and still waiting. There it is. Nothing much to do until my attention comes back this way. The enemy is slowly building up. As you can see, there's more coming in the distance. And there's a whole bunch of troops over in those trees, not really doing very much, which is good. I certainly didn't know they were there at the time. And there they are, hanging out. Now my Wolverine is finally moving forward. I've come back over to this side. I thought, okay, let's move forward to get that tank out in the field. But of course, when I gave that order, I didn't know about the other tank on the right. And that's probably a bit unfortunate. The Wolverine spots it, but doesn't turn to face it, so it gets a side armor hit. And the second one, and that's that. So over here on the right hand of the battlefield, since it's all quiet, I think it's time to send in some troops. I've sent in a flamethrower unit, which in hindsight wasn't the best unit to send in, as it's really a support unit and requires some other more heavy duty infantry or some tanks to work with, and can't really hold ground by itself. But it's a nice scenic trip on the road here, around the ponds and off towards the woods. Here, one of the enemy Tyrans in the town starts to get the better of my armour. That Wolverine took a shot to the side, and then there's a little head-to-head duel between the Sherman and the Tyran, firing at one another. I should have probably brought up the second tank to help double team the enemy, but they basically shoot one another to bits. Oh well. So now, as you can see, the town itself has the lone Sherman, and I'm bringing up some infantry behind it to occupy some of those buildings, so it's not entirely by itself, trying to keep the enemy at bay. It may have been better here to have moved my Sherman back to covering the road, but a bit further back from that intersection, so that infantry in the buildings couldn't get at it. Still, it does its job. There's another circumstance where moving my Sherman forward at speed would have forced that enemy unit to surrender. Could have been handy, but I shot it to bits anyway, just used more bullets. On the left you can see that salient is creeping forward fairly rapidly, and that did cause me some concern at the time. Of course, in the replay I know that it's just a single tank in there. Here are my reinforcing infantry coming up the road and heading to that small factory complex on the left. And once again, they don't get spotted by the tank. Lucky me. Finally, that Hungarian tank is spotted, and there's a brief firefight with my Wolverine. And that's that. Hooray, we've cleared up that tank on that side. I've got a Sherman coming up. I'm going to join the Wolverine, and then it'll be time to push forward. Once more, I've given some set and forget orders to the Wolverine and the Sherman, and being focused elsewhere, I failed to notice that there's a bit of a firefight going on over here, and these poor infantry are being chewed up. Bit unfortunate. I have my rifles leader moving over to the buildings on the right, and they manage to avoid being spotted as they make their way across the open, which is a good thing. And there's my plucky little town defence at work. I have a submachine gun working its way around to the right there where the green line is, and I'll be setting that up and then eventually moving back into the town. Sending the flamethrowers ahead. They keep complaining, I don't mind. They're just going to go ahead. Get the edge of that forest there. And the enemy has some more armour heading into the town. And it's not really going to last very long. Let's watch. and the flamethrower squad and the Wasp flamethrower vehicle are moving up into this forest, still unopposed. There's nothing there for them to fight with, and so it's a bit of a cakewalk, which is probably nice. They can hear a battle going off way on the left. They're probably glad not to be part of it. So back here on the left hand side, I have my tanks moving cautiously up the road, and I have my rifle units advancing across that field and into the forest. Now you can see here there's a bunch of enemy units waiting for us on that forest edge, which I have little idea is there, although I believe my leader in the building there can see a couple of them. Certainly I know the tank is there. So my initial plan is to send both these armored vehicles around the edge of the forest there and attack those units behind the forest, but as you can see, I find myself engaged with some armor on the right, and this puts me off sending both of them around because they could get side shot. So I leave the Wolverine behind to cover that forest a bit to the north. Then unfortunately I get the Sherman to poke its head out at somewhat the wrong angle. Concerned about being attacked on both flanks, I pull the Wolverine back while I wait for the rifles to move up through the forest, which would then allow me to do a much more coordinated attack. Again, my focus is being pulled away at an inopportune moment, and so these units are not being very effective in fighting the enemy straight away. Basically just sitting there exchanging shots while the other two rifle units are too deep in the forest to give any assist, and the Wolverine's just chilling. We'll get them going in a moment. And here we go, now things are set up a lot better. The Wolverine's going in there, firing away, and is head to head with the enemy armour and takes it out very quickly. At which point it's a big clean-up with the enemy scattered about in a very awkward stance. Once again, this would have been a good time to move my fast-moving units forward forcing some surrenders on those guys instead of firing all this artillery and ammunition at them. But the job is done. Here's some troops coming up in some nifty troop carriers called Kangaroos. And again, a little more aggression by my armour against their infantry to force surrenders would have been a good idea here. If you look carefully, you can see the proximity of my Sherman, which is a command unit, is giving little stars to the troops near it. That's extra veterancy that makes them better at what they do. And now, over on the right, the Hungarians have finally sent some actual troops to challenge me in that otherwise empty terrain. Remember that Humber sitting on the hill there on the left? It's watching these proceedings and really just waiting for the enemy to move in range of its machine guns. And these guys have unloaded from their vehicle. I still think a bit too early. But anyway, running across the field here, heading towards the buildings in the distance. It's all quiet and peaceful. As far as they're concerned, there's not really anybody ahead of them. Off we go. Over this muddy terrain here, over to that field. There's a second truck behind them. Coming in, it's unloaded its troops as well. They're continuing their advance. Getting close to that building now. Not too far to go. Just chilling, making our way across here. Looks good. Uh-oh. So most of the guys lying down here haven't been shot. They're just pinned down and trying to find some way to get across. They're not crawling at the moment. And now the second unit's coming under fire from the Humber. But you can see there's some real heavy duty infantry heading towards my flamethrower guys, who really don't stand a chance here. Meanwhile, over here on the left, the enemy has made a bit of a salient into my area. It's not really actually a very strong attack. If you look, there's only a couple of units involved. But from my point of view, there could have been many hidden units in there. I wasn't sure what to do about that. You'll notice I've positioned an anti-tank gun down the south there. It's got quite a field of fire. Hopefully it'll kill any tank that pokes its head out. But back at the right-hand flank, my flamethrower vehicle is there, but it gets zapped by a Panzerfaust and poof, all gone. Notice the blue movement arrow. That's the standard movement arrow you get when you right click somewhere. A better approach is, if you remember the quick key, you press a Q and then left click and you get hunt movement, which means that they'll move forward a little more cautiously, and if they find an opponent that they need to deal with, they'll stop and take defensive position and start firing away. I definitely need to find some way of taking care of this salient on the right. It's approaching too many of my flags, and I should be able to recapture that area. So bring in some armor and see what we can do there. And since Combined Arms is the name of the game really, bring in some infantry up here on the hill so that the armor and infantry can work together. Up on the hill here, they'll have good defensive position and some nice cover.
Second section, ready, sir.
Over on the left here, I'm building up to move forward. And one of the tricks with this is to make sure that you've built up troops rather than just throwing them in as they arrive. Otherwise you lose them piecemeal. Over here I've got my infantry making their way along, as well as I have a few armoured vehicles coming up on the right, going along the scenic route here. Of course, as you move your front line forward, it means you're further and further away from your reinforcement points, and it takes longer to get things up to the front. At the moment, I haven't really advanced very much to the enemy area, so it takes just as long as it did in the beginning. My Humber Recon has been giving me a lot of information about that area, but I see some strong infantry coming up to try and take it on, so I've pulled it back here. Hopefully by the time their infantry are up to the hill, so is mine. carefully watch the lead infantry vehicle as it tries to head up the hill. Danger in this game is getting a transport sniped with all of the guys still on board. And that transport got sniped, but just after the guys got out. Well done, you. You'll also notice that there's only 2 infantry units of the enemy covering this entire flank. If I'd known that, I would have just hurled my tanks forward and taken them out, really. I early on sort of did a lot of stuff like this, and not really paying attention to the things hiding in the far right in the forest. But here we go, charge of the Armoured Brigade. Over on the left, we're still building up for that push. Got some reinforcements coming down the road and engaging the enemy armour in a bit of a long-range duel. As you can see there, shells are bouncing off my armour on the DD, but my shots are more or less one-shotting their armour, melting it away. Still in the central town at the moment and trying to reinforce the position. The enemy has controlled the flag though. And now it's time for the big push on the left, and moving everything towards that little complex of buildings with the flag in it. You'll see that up in the top right corner I pushed there number of tickets down quite a bit. If the red bar, which is my one, gets to the end, that means I lose. If the blue bar, which is theirs, gets down to the end, they lose. At the moment they've got more tickets than I have, but I'm hoping to change that. So my guys are coming under heavy fire here, and they're in the open moving, but what I plan to do is get them behind these buildings so they've got cover, and then I'll take stock of my position and see if I can assault the hill. Bringing this light armoured vehicle forward as a bit of a weapons platform, get its guns into range, and if I can pin the enemy down I could also charge in and hopefully surrender them. using some artillery fire here to help with pinning the infantry down as well. Notice this lone infantry unit going into the woods on the left here. I got an inkling that in fact those woods were no longer really heavily occupied and sent them forward. It would have been nice if I'd had more troops to send in with them, but oh well, take what you can get. And now it's time to send everything forward against the hill. Positions being pounded, the troops up there being pinned or demoralised, and away we go. Get a surrender there. See the little white flags? They'd had enough. Hands on heads. Time to give up. Now for a little backwards and forwards with these flamethrowers. And there you have it. For the moment, the left flank is mine, all mine. So to win the game, I basically need to hold the flags I've still got. So over here on the right, I'm just really consolidating my position, but also advancing a little bit on that flag in the town. I should need to be careful, the enemy has dug in there. In the meantime, a lot of fierce fighting happening in Middletown. Bring up some reinforcements, but a few things going a bit wrong. You'll notice my Sherman there is actually behind a building and doesn't have a clear line of sight on the enemy armour, which is a pity because it probably could have taken them out, although it is a bit low on some of its ammo. I have a machine gun in the church tower, but it's not much use against the armour, but that does help to suppress the infantry. So now these stormtroopers are coming across the town, and they're unfortunately caught out in the open by the enemy tanks. I'm just sending that kangaroo on the left to quickly get some buildings, and I have these infantry reinforcements coming up the back. So I'm unloading them before they get in range of the tanks and setting them up in these buildings. And the kangaroo unfortunately is spotted and side shot. I do get to return the favour with my Sherman in a short while. over here on the right, managing to consolidate that area and covering that field fairly well. You can see I bring in a heavy tank on the right hand side there, and there's a kangaroo down south that I've sort of forgot about, and I think it just sits there for a long time.
Damn, it's hot here. Awaiting instruction. Back up. Slowly.
Now I've seen them bring in what looks like a fairly heavy tank, a Nimrod, so I'm just getting my Stuarts to find a bit more safety. I could look at what the Nimrod is capable of. It's one of the drawbacks of playing this as a novice player, is I don't really know what all the pieces do. And that's going to be part of my journey, I think. Also notice the Lovash behind enemy lines there. They weren't pushing the front line forward because they've been surrounded. Now they're behind me and getting into the woods, but my Stuart has found them. Unfortunately, of course, they have anti-tank weapons, and that's the end of the Stuart. So this is a bit of a setback, these guys showing up. So from my player's perspective, I know those troops are there now, but I can't see them because my spotter is gone. So I'm just moving this tank back out of range of their Panzerfausts, so they'd have to come out of the woods to get at my tank, which would put them at a disadvantage. And then I changed my mind. I think I reasoned that they'd be heading back to the front line to get back into the fray, and that the front line would start moving forward once they got across that portion. And I've got my Wolverine coming up on the right anyhow, which may be able to engage them. And there's that kangaroo and some stormtroopers sitting down the bottom still, forgotten and neglected in the woods, probably having a picnic. Now I could really do with some infantry on the right hand side here, but I've sent my armour forward largely to take care of the infantry leadership. As you can see, they're triangulating on him. And now here comes the all-important infantry to try and get that woods back and clear out the enemy. And an anti-tank gun, which I probably don't need at the moment, but it might be good to have it covering the area in case some tanks are brought up later. And once more, if I just rapidly moved against these guys, I could have surrendered them. This is one of the big lessons I think I had to learn from this particular battle. The consequences of letting these guys fight for another day is in fact going to be the loss of my anti-tank gun. Dang. Anyway, my rifles are moving in on them now. Wolverine, I've rather cautiously left further back. Probably could have brought that in to help out a bit. As you can see, my score is now 17 flags versus 7, or 16 versus 8, going backwards and forwards a little bit there. At that level, their ticks are reducing at twice the normal speed, which is great. I should be able to win in 4 minutes. Back in the central town, my Sherman's having a good holdout and blast this building to bits.
Moving on the new firing position. This is a story you will tell your grandchildren.
As you can see, I'm slowly bringing up troops from the rear, get closer to the front action. I've got my guys cautiously at the back of the town here, and I'm moving them further back into those woods.
There will be no more derogatory insults about the Yanks.
So I've spotted this larger force working its way into the town, and I'm fairly wisely, I think, pulling back away from it, trying to bring up some better troops and some more comprehensive weaponry. The machine gun in the church tower is coming into its own here, but it's not got a lot of resilience left. And a nice hit on that tank making its way across the field. Hurrah! The enemy Terrans, as you can see, have quite a high rate of fire compared to my Sherman, but it's very ineffectual, just bouncing off the front armour there. My one shot back takes it out. The anti-tank gun on the right there is getting a few shots in, manages to take a tank out, but it is itself being pinned down by the amount of fire it's receiving. Sherman is having to swivel backwards and forwards, taking out tanks on the left and shooting at infantry down the road. As you can see, I'm gradually bringing up some anti-tank guns on the left, but it's oh so slow. I really did need to have some vehicles that I could hitch them up to and move them on. And sadly, my Sherman is taken out by a flamethrower bolt. Dang. So I'm still winning by the number of flags I'm holding, but the enemy has firmly taken that central town now. So taking the long view, I've got the right hand side pretty much, except for those guys hanging out in the woods. I bring up reinforcements in the middle, and I'm sending my artillery to fire onto the town. On the left, some more troops managed to sneak into the woods on the left, so I lost that flag there. I'm going to have to fight back for it. And here are those troops coming in. You can see there's some infantry and transports, and I really wasn't paying a lot of attention on this side. So they're able to get there, recapture the flag, and take up a position. You can see by my foreground troop movements there that I'm really concentrating on getting the town back and sending these guys forward from the trees across that empty space, try and come at the town from the side. Seem to be lining up here to have a very small skirmish in the woods. I've sent that command carrier in, hoping it'll get some nice shots in the light forest. But as you can see, the enemy is sticking to the heavy forest cover, and that means they may get close enough to use their anti-tank weapons on me. And there you have it. Another one bites the dust to a Panzerfaust. It's sad. I have some more troops coming in to try and handle this growing situation. And these ones are going to be better at closing in on those troops in the dense forest. This is a bit of a mistake with the command carrier though. Yeah. It's like, they did that to me earlier, why would I stand here and take it again? On the right, I'm bringing some infantry in to try and take care of those holdouts, and slowly putting more pressure on the southern end of the town in the centre. This armoured unit throwing itself across, revealing too much of its side armour, and it's going to pay for it. Still, it's a nice exchange. Got rid of one of their tanks for one of mine. have an armoured column coming to reinforce the attack of the town. Throwing more armour in. I think I may have run out of infantry to throw into the game at this point. Bring some more armour to fight in the battle on the left, and getting the mortars to drop some heavy stuff on them. Not doing so well in the town yet. Trying to push these guys back.
Good job, Gunner. Button up. We're engaging. Looking for a prey.
I think I was doing alright there, but fortunately time is running out. As you can see, the blue tickets are almost all gone, and so the game is mine. Just a few last moments to mop a few things up if I can.
Preston, get your head down.
And there you have it. Game over, minor victory to me. 13 objectives captured at the very last moment. And that was quite a lot of fun to play. I learnt quite a bit. So next time you see me, I will be playing a little better than that time. And we'll see what we can learn in the future.